Hello everyone. In this video, let's take a look at some of the most basic of PHP's operators. Most of these operators are things that I'm sure you've seen before in other languages, so I won't spend too much time talking about the easy ones, but there are a few interesting places in here that I like to go ahead and go over just to make sure we're all on the same page going forward. I've already here started an example, and in the example, I've dropped in a set of PHP tags, and in those PHP tags I've put in a block comment that just has a quick list of some of the operators that I want to point out to you here. The first of these operators is the assignment operator, which is the equal sign. We've actually used it a few times in previous examples when we were assigning values to variables. So for example, I could create a variable, I'll call it first name, and I could assign a value to it, Victrola, for example. That would be an example of using the assignment operator to assign a literal value to a variable. We could also do things like create a variable and assign its value based on the value of an already existing variable. So I could create another variable, I will call it person, and I will assign it the value of first name. So the value of a variable using the assignment operator can be assigned from a literal value or from a variable value. Now, I could go ahead and confirm that those both worked. I could say echo first name is, and I'll do an echo for the first name variable. I could do an echo for break person is, and an echo for the person variable. There we are. If I take a look at that in my browser then, you can see that first name is Victrola and person is Victrola, pretty much like you should have expected. That's really about all there is to the assignment operator. It's not a complicated one. Hopefully it's one that you've had some experience with. About the only little gotcha I can think of pointing out with it is what happens when we are assigning a variable's value based on the value of another variable and the original variable changes. For example, here if I say person equals first name, what happens if I then come and I change the value of the first name variable? If I change the first name variable so its value becomes Bernard, when I print out the value of the first name variable, what will I print out? Well, if you guessed Bernard, you're correct. What then would be the value of the person variable? Did the person variable follow the change with the first name variable, or did it remain with the value that it was originally assigned? If we take a look in the browser, we'll get the answer, and that's that the first name variable changed, but the person variable did not. The reason it worked that way is that whenever we use the assignment operator, what we are assigning is a value. We are not assigning a reference. So when I say set the person variable equal to the first name variable, I'm basically saying make a copy of the value that's currently in the first name variable and assign that copy to the person variable. Because of that, when I then come down and change the value of the first name variable, it doesn't affect the person variable at all. The person variable still has its own independent copy of the previous value that was in first name. So that's about all there is to the assignment operator. All right. The next set of operators we need to talk about are then those that are used for doing arithmetic. These are really pretty simple. I imagine that you've seen and used most all of these before. The arithmetic operators in PHP are the same as they are in most other programming languages. We've of course got the plus sign for doing addition. We can do subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. I'm not really even sure what I might say about any of those in particular that you wouldn't already know, so I'll leave those like that. But we can also, in the realm of arithmetic operators, talk about the fact that PHP supports a set of shortcut operators. These shortcut operators, plus equals, minus equals, multiply equals, divide equals, and modulus equals, little typo there, modulus equals. Those are a set of operators that are never actually going to have to be used. Those operators are purely a convenience. They're not anything that you would ever find yourself in a situation where there would be no way to accomplish what you wanted to accomplish without using them. Let me show you what I mean by those. Let's say we have a variable called x and we give it a value of 9. If I go ahead and echo the value of x is, and then I echo the value of x, no big surprise, I'm sure, that we will print out the value of x is 9. Looks like maybe I should put a break in there to clean up that output a little bit. But essentially, of course, they're just assigning a value to a variable, nothing all that special in that particular case. If I wanted to at this point, say add 1 to x, I could do that by saying $x equals $x plus 1. $x equals $x plus 1 is basically saying take the current value of x, add 1 to it, and then the new value that results from that should be assigned to the variable x. Once that's done, we can see the result by doing another echo. The value of x is now, and I'll echo x again. And again, doesn't take much imagination to see that we are going to end up with a value of 10. With the shortcut operators, what the shortcut operator would do is simply give me a convenient way to be able to take a statement, an expression like this, and to shorten it. Instead of saying x equals x plus 1, what I could do instead is I could just say $x plus equals 1. These two statements are equivalent. X equals x plus 1 or x plus equals 1 amount to the exact same thing. Whenever we use the shortcut operators, all we're doing is performing a mathematical operation on the two operands that are given, often a variable and a literal, but could be just about anything, and then we're simply taking that value that results from the operation, we're reassigning it to the left value, so in this case to x. Here, with that statement in place of what I had previously, if I take a look at the output, you can see there's absolutely no difference. So all of the different shortcut operators work exactly that same way. So you can do shortcuts with addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, or modulus, and that's all there is to them. Also in the area of doing arithmetic, PHP does support the increment and decrement operators, plus plus and minus minus. Again, here, instead of doing x plus equals 1, another possibility is that we could do $x plus plus. $x plus plus simply means add 1 to the value of x. So again, we end up with a value of x equal to 10. We could also do a decrement, $x minus minus, in which case we subtract 1. So instead of x being 9, x then becomes 8. About the only thing about the increment and decrement operators that sometimes throw people off are the fact that they can be used in a prefix or a postfix position. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's say I echo the value of x. I'll just do x colon and then echo $x, and then I'm going to do echo x colon again. And then echo x one more time, like that. Let me throw a few breaks in there, make it a little bit easier to see. And the way things come out right now is x shows up as 8 both times. Now, what would happen if I came back up to this first echo for the value of x and I said x plus plus? You might think that we would get a value of 8 printed out the first time. Well, actually here with the plus plus, you might not think that. You might assume that here the plus plus is actually going to cause x to become 9, and then to show that x is 9 again here on the second output. But in actuality, the first output of x shows 8 still, and it's not until the second output that we actually see the value of x has changed to 9. The reason for that is that I put the plus plus, the increment operator, after my variable. Now, using the increment or decrement operators in a post or a prefix way, this being a postfix, a prefix being if I were to put it before the variable, what that's actually going to do is that's going to end up changing when the actual increment or decrement happens in the expression, in the overall statement that we're typing. So here, if I say $x plus plus, where the plus plus comes after the variable, what we're actually saying by putting the plus plus after the x, using the increment operator and its postfix technique here, its postfix position, maybe is the best word, is we're essentially saying don't do the increment until last. That's really all it comes down to. So the first thing that happens in this statement is that we first echo x. That's the first thing that happens. X's value currently is 8, so 8 is what actually ends up getting output there. Then after the output, after the echo is done, we then increment the value of x. X becomes 9, so we end up seeing 9 output here when we output x again. So 8 and then 9. If I were to come up and I were to put the plus plus in its prefix position, what we would end up seeing there is, or what we're saying to do there is we're saying first increment the value of x. So before anything else in this line happens, we're saying add 1 to x. So x, which was previously 8, will become 9, and then it'll still be 9 when we get down here to the second output of x. So we end up with 9, 9 in that case. The exact same thing happens when you do a decrement. If I say minus minus x, right, I'm saying first subtract 1 from x, so the 8 will become 7. Right? If I were to do the decrement operator in its postfix position, then I'm saying first output x and then subtract 1 from it. So we should see 8 and 7, just like that. So the increment and decrement operators can be very handy. Whether we're using them in their pre or their postfix position just kind of depends on what exactly it is that we're using them for. But just being able to add one is something that we'll do, or subtract one is something that we'll find that we need to do fairly commonly when we start working with things like loops and counting. The last of the operators that I want to talk about in this video is the string concatenation operator, which in PHP is simply the period. A lot of languages you might have seen or used before have probably used the plus sign in order to do string concatenation, where essentially you could take one string, a plus sign, another string, and the language would then take those two strings and combine them into one. In PHP, the same thing can be done, but instead of using the plus sign, we instead use the period. So let me show you real quick how that works. Starting off real simply, if I have a string, something like, let's just say test1, and I then put a period followed by another string, I'll put a space and test2, the final result is that PHP is going to take both of those two separate strings and combine them together, concatenate them because of the use of the equals, or the period, sorry. If I look at that in my browser, you can see that those two got appended together there, and as a result, just one string ended up being output. I'm just going to throw a break in there to clean that up. There we go. This is a nice convenience, nice thing that'll make some of the other things that we do in PHP quite a bit easier. It's been a little bit of a struggle, I might even say, up until this point in how I was putting together a lot of these examples because I was having to keep myself from using that period operator, that string concatenation operator, until we actually talked about it. Well, what was so inconvenient about it? Well, it meant that I was having to write a whole lot of echo statements is really what it came down to. Take these two echo statements here, for example. First I was echoing out first name is, a string literal, and then I was echoing out first name, which is a string variable. In actuality, there's no reason I actually needed to use two echoes for that. I could have just taken those two things and combined them together using the string concatenation operator. So again, like below, I'm taking the string value of this variable and the string literal value here, and I'm combining the two of them together with the period and then echoing them both out at the same time. So if I take a look at my output, nothing's any different. It's just a much easier way for me to be able to actually write the code. A lot less echo statements for me to have to write. Let me go through and change a few of these others here. There. Now isn't that a whole lot nicer than what I had there a minute ago? A lot fewer echo statements. If I go and I actually take a look at the output from this, you can see that again, nothing has changed. All I've done is written the code in a more concise, easier to read, easier to write form because of the use of that period operator, that string concatenation operator. Really nice. It goes even further than this though, not related specifically to that string concatenation operator, but something else that I can do that relates to strings that again can make my code simpler and potentially even easier to read, has to do with when I'm actually outputting the value of simple variables, like my first name variable here. You might see that if I were to take that first name variable and actually make it a part of the string that I was concatenating it to, if I go and take a look at that in my browser, what actually ends up happening is it ends up printing out the actual variable name itself, $firstname, which would very rarely ever be the actual result that we desire. But if I come back to that exact same string and instead of having single quotes around it, if I instead put double quotes around it and take a look, you can see it actually goes back to outputting the exact same thing I had before. The difference here is the difference in what happens when PHP encounters a string that is delimited with the single quotes versus what happens when PHP encounters a string that's delimited with the double quotes. Whenever PHP sees a string with single quotes around it, PHP simply takes that string as it is. It says, this group of characters, this string is what it is. I'm simply going to do whatever I was told to do with it, echo it, assign it, whatever it may happen to be. But whenever we have a string that has double quotes around it, that actually tells PHP, take a deeper look at this string and inside of it, see if you can find any variables. If you can find any variables, then instead of the variable name, substitute in the variable's value. So here, with this particular string where I'm outputting the first name, because I have the double quotes around it, PHP looks inside the string, sees the first name variable, and substitutes in the value of that variable, Bernard. So the overall string that I echo ends up being first name is colon space and then Bernard. That only happens in strings that have the double quotes around them, and you can see here in the output, Bernard is exactly what I ended up with. If I wanted to go through and change some of my other strings to be like that as well, I end up with this. Let's take a look and see how this now looks in the web browser. Overall looks pretty good, except one line. This one line right here, x8++. What in the world's going on with that? Well, that's actually coming from this echo statement I have right here. We put in a break, we print out x colon space. Because there's double quotes around the outside of it, PHP looks deeper into the string for variables. It sees a variable there called $x, so it substitutes in its value, 8. But then what does it do with the plus plus? Well, this is really the big drawback of this particular technique, this nice little trick, and that's that the only variables, the only things you can put inside these double quoted strings that PHP will correctly interpret are simple variable values. So in all these other places, simple variable x, simple variable person, simple variable first name, a few lines up from there, those all work fine. But when we try to do something even as just routine as add one, increment, a variable inside a string this way, PHP does not know how to interpret it. Right? We end up actually getting the plus plus output as if they were additional characters of the string. So in that particular case, we're actually better off leaving the variable, not even really better off, we really have to leave the variable outside the string itself and use the period to simply concatenate the value of the variable with the actual string that we're wanting to output. So there we go. That puts everything right again. This ability in PHP to be able to substitute in the value of variables for the variable names themselves in strings is referred to as interpolation. It's something that's popping up in a lot of languages nowadays. It can be quite handy, as you can see. The only real downside of it in PHP is the fact that it works with nothing except for the simplest scalar variables. We can't do it with anything fancier than that, which is too bad, but we can at least go ahead and take advantage of what capabilities PHP does have when it comes to string interpolation.